Catcher in the Rye.
Mm,
I think it's a terrible book, but it's it's read all the time.
yeah. Well, howdy there, gracious gang. This is Mike Creevy, host of the Gracious Guest Show. And I gotta say, all things considered, I'm doing pretty well. My family's doing pretty well. We are right now in the midst of, at the time of this recording, we're in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. I'm recording right now on March 27th, 2020, although this isn't going to air for a few weeks. But at any rate, we're just sort of hanging in there, doing the best we can, like I think everybody is, more or less. Certainly keeping in our thoughts and prayers any of those actually infected, their families, anybody who is affected in any way, shape, or form, as we all are, through just all the economic impact of it and the social impact and those kinds of things. So, it's time for certainly perspective and time for us to reflect, I think, on some of the things we hold most dear and some of the basic assumptions we have tended to form at different times, and sort of see how they hold up right now. And, it's interesting. There's I think a lot that we can learn in moments like this about what's already in us, what we're really like, at least right now, and to perhaps reflect on how we can maybe change a little bit if we need to, or grow in areas where we might need to. So, for instance, if something like this shakes me up and makes me more apt to, show panic or to lash out or be really, really aggressive or agitated, that kind of thing, it's worth reflecting on what am I basing a lot of my security on, a lot of my attitude on in life. Am I basically so comfortable and so used to getting whatever I need, or really whatever I want at my fingertips at a moment's notice, and then the first time I don't have access to that stuff, I just come unhinged? That's worth a look. What do I really need in life? What do I prioritize? Do I really believe that God is in all suffering and guides all things, or do I just say that? So I can't say where you're at. I can say where I am, and I know where I need some work for sure. So praying for all of you guys, and I've been. So whenever you hear this, God ultimately can distribute the graces, of anything we pray for wherever they need to be, in mysterious ways we can't fully comprehend. So anyway, I just wanted to say a little word about that real quick. Today I'm excited because I have a guest, and that's becoming more of the norm around here on the Gracious Guest Show. And this was just an awesome conversation I had with my dear friend Charles Comer. And Charles is a philosophy professor and a friend of mine, and he's also an enthusiast of great books. And so, you hear this phrase "great books" a lot, especially last couple decades, I'd say, or last few years that I've been aware of it. And what is a great book? What constitutes a great book? There's a lot of schools, including my own, that are attempting to begin great books programs. There's some debate about what constitutes a great book. No little debate about that. So I thought I'd talk to Charles and see where we could get with it. So go ahead and buckle up for this really interesting interview, I think, about the great books. Let's check it out. Charles, thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm very pleased to be here. It's my pleasure. Looking forward to a good discussion on the great books.
Well, not to date ourselves too much here, but we are officially recording this in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, which I heard someone make I think it was Trent Horn actually in his podcast. Shout out to Trent, who said, he pointed out that you can't spell pandemic without panic. And I was like, well, that's literally true. So we're making the most of it here, and this is some good way to have a conversation, at least digitally. So
Indeed.
But why don't you just tell us, for those the listeners who don't really know you at all, from our interactions before on my other show, the Ever Ancient Ever New show I used to host. Who is Charles Comer?
Oh well, I ask myself that all the time. I think for me, at least, it's an important question. Well, I am a professor of philosophy over at Harrisburg Area Community College. I teach intro to philosophy. I teach comparative religions, ethics sometimes. And I've also taught art history, the ancient to medieval part of that. And I've done that too. I'm originally from the Baltimore area. I taught at Towson U. I taught that kind of art history class there as well.
Oh, okay.
So I have a background in that, in the arts, particularly art history and things like that, but also in philosophy.
I don't think I knew that about the art history.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure that I did. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So with this, this idea of great books, and obviously a big sort of disclaimer up front, like there's no way we could possibly exhaust this in one conversation anyway.
Yeah.
So we're sticking to about a half hour, give or take. I always say that give or take because, usually I'm wrong, but but maybe you could tell us a little bit here about, at least in sort of your experience here, understanding with this, what are we talking about just in general when we talk about the great books, and for those who may not have ever heard that before?
Right. Well, let's first make some synonyms of this idea of great books. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the great books. All right. What might that be? Obviously it brings to mind something like a list of books that are important or
Mm-hmm.
good. Great can obviously mean great in quality, great in the expanse of people throughout history that it's reached, and so on and so forth. So we have that kind of idea of great books. Now it's still very broad. That could encompass all kinds of different things. But then we also often refer to the great books as classics. Right? I think we're narrowing
Right.
in a little bit more. Well, what's a classic? The word itself comes from the Latin classis or classicus that actually reference something like a fleet of ships or an ordered brigade or something. So we have this this body of literature that has something to do maybe with how we have or how we ought to order our lives, something along those lines. All right, a little bit narrower still. Then we can also think about the great books or the classics as something like the great tradition. All right, tradition, again, an important word, comes from the Latin tradere, right, which means something like to hand off, something that we've been giving, our legacy. And in some ways, many of the people that are great admirers of the great books, or maybe they teach in great books programs at colleges, often remark that this turn away from the great books or from classical education is denying people of their, many Americans or people who are kind of participating in the Western civilization.
Right.
They're being denied part of their birthright, right? Tony Esolen, for example, he's one who often refers to that problem.
Sure.
So the great tradition, all right, as it is part of Western tradition.
Gotcha.
And Western civilization. And then also, I think it's fair to also call the great books the great conversation.
Right.
I had a philosophy textbook that I used years ago that was called The Great Conversation, as something that is ongoing. We got from these pre-Socratic philosophers, we had Socrates come in, and then Plato, and then Aristotle, and then these different schools all the way on up to the present. So that's some maybe terms. Italo Calvino, the Italian author, defined maybe a great book or a classic in this way. He said, "A classic is a book that has never finished saying what it has to say."
Well, we could just leave it there. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
That is something. Because I had in my notes here, just from what I've been looking at a little bit before we started chatting, I was thinking about this and staying power, like some things that came to my mind, like buzzwords, I guess, like something that has staying power, something that uh, never gets old. And I think, you can even see this to some extent with not just books, but with art, with movies, for that matter.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
I'm preparing right now to do a panel conversation on Gladiator, and I'm pretty sure that came out in the fall, I think, of like 2000. So it's like,
Right.
which blows my mind, by the way. I can't believe that
I
movie's 20
know, I
years old,
know.
but it's 20 years old, and I literally never get sick of watching it. And I could watch it. I could watch it every year, many times, or I could not see it for 10 years and watch it, and it's like all new again. And I find that there's something like that. I feel like with certain books too, where I think we all maybe have this little inkling where there's just something that you might be reading for work. You might be reading for, like, I think I should read this, or, it's that attitude. And then
Mhm.
sometimes you just hit the wall and you just go back to to something completely different, something that, you weren't thinking of reading again, but it just, you get drawn to it. So I guess, does that make sense? And that's kind of what I'm thinking of with what you said,
Yes,
there's a
and I
mystery
think,
to it too.
well, I think in part too, that speaks to maybe a distinction between, I don't know, what might be a great book, something like that, that has staying power, that is very, very good, in one way or another, or maybe not, or maybe it's not very good, and then something like a classic. And then I
Mm,
will tell you, and I know maybe some of your listeners are going to send me hate mail or send you hate mail to be directed at me. I'll give you an example of something that might be considered, I don't know, a great book. At any rate, it's
mhm.
very common in a lot of high school English curricula, and that is Catcher in the Rye.
Mm.
I think it's a terrible book, but it's read all the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but I don't think it contributes very much. I mean, it's maybe historically it has some importance, but
yeah.
is it a great book? I don't know.
Like, has enough
Yeah.
time passed too for it to be considered one? Maybe speak to that a little bit too. I don't know, like, how much you think
Yeah.
that has to do with, we're not just saying if it's old, it's great, because there's plenty of stuff that
No,
was written
no.
back way back when that was terrible.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Um, but what do you think about, like, the idea of it? Let me just shift gears here a little bit, because what I wanted to ask was, a better way of putting it was, we, like, you and I are both Catholic. There's plenty of folks listening to this who might not be Catholic, but to use that word in the general sense, like universal,
Hmm.
because the more I sort of try to learn about what people mean by these, great books or great books program, it seems to have at least the goal of trying to find certain texts that resonate with, really, or can resonate with people everywhere across time. Like, it's like, I think of Augustine's Confessions, for example,
Hmm. Yeah,
which,
great
like,
book.
when I read that in college, and it just, I never get sick of that, because
Hmm.
it's like I could have written it. Not that I could write like him, but I mean, like, it's so absolutely relevant. Like, every page of it is utterly relevant. And here's this guy who lived a life that, like, in one sense, I can't even possibly imagine. Like, it's so absolutely not connected with anything I do on a day-to-day basis, in terms of, the way his society was structured, and, like, the way they dressed, like, all that kind of stuff is
Right.
completely alien to me. However, everything he describes experiencing on one level or another is something that, like, well, yeah, I've felt that, or yeah, I felt like that, or that happened to me, or that's a little like this. And it's, you hear that from so many people who read it. So, I mean, is that, you think, part of what might be a criterion for a great book?
I surely do. Yeah, I think there's something perennial maybe about the topics in a great book. And like you said, and I think this is important, that many of these great books, a great deal of them were written a long time ago by people living in cultures that are very different than ours. And in some ways, that speaks against the idea that, oh, these books are part of the Western canon or the Western tradition. We need to be diverse a little bit. I don't know. I think there's a great deal of diversity to be found in the however you want to phrase it, the canon, the great books, and many of the values are different. Here we can go back a little bit further than Augustine, even back further than Plato and Socrates, to Homer, right?
Right.
To the Iliad or the Odyssey. There, we encounter these very colorful people, but and many of the themes about, say, honor and struggles and things like this might ring familiar, but then the virtues and the values and things like this, their idea of the way arete or excellence, right, is articulated in Homer, it's a little familiar, but then it's also a little bit not, you
Right.
know. And there's still something that just, it grabs you. And I'm not necessarily, I like Homer, all right. It's not that kind of poetry is not necessarily my wheelhouse. I'd like to get a little bit more into it
Yeah.
um, as I grow. But I'm more of a philosophy guy,
Right.
which we'll talk about maybe how one should start getting into the great books if they're not. It's not like this
Right.
long list and you just start anywhere. It's But go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no. And I was just going to ask. I mean, like, just in your opinion, why do you think? Because I was looking at a little bit of the historical background of it, and you see figures like Mortimer Adler, who I don't know a whole
Yeah.
lot about, or I'm learning more and more about him. Fascinating, but you know, it really seems to be a couple sources I looked at that describe this. What I see maybe as kind of a reaction. This is what you said. We talked before about there's inevitably some discussion here, at least a little bit in the realm of like modern education. Certainly in
Mhm.
the U.S. And it seems like you get this 19th century into the 20th century shift in the United States to a very regimented. I was reading a book that talked about it, the specific historical roots of like Prussian military academy,
Mhm.
sort of roots that there were U.S. education figures in the 1800s who visited these like this Prussian sort of school and really kind of sort of impose that model kind of and it leads to all this kind of deeper discussion about our education system, but that's not something necessarily we want to get into. But
Yeah.
maybe what's your understanding within that context of how this desire seems to be growing for a more in-depth, not just cursory, mention of these texts, but actually engaging them and digging into them when maybe a lot of these were part of just what you read. I know Thomas Jefferson, like you look at the founders in that era, that this was just formational, like these kinds of
Oh yeah.
texts that you would
Yeah.
read and engage and like these building blocks that sometimes I mean, I never seriously got into them in my education, growing up. So
Yeah.
I threw a lot in there, but what do you have to say maybe about just in your experience, your understanding of why that desire is really growing, it seems, for these?
But there are many reasons, I think, why that is. But let me go back a minute to something
Sure.
that you mentioned that should be remembered. Up until maybe the turn of the 20th century or so, certainly throughout the 19th century, colleges like Harvard, and Yale, and these many other colleges besides, there was one major, if you could even call it a major. You went to college and you got an education in the seven liberal arts, right?
Mm,
That are comprised of the trivium and the quadrivium,
right.
right? That would be articulated through the great books,
Mm,
largely. All right. And math, you would read Euclid, and what would Euclid be doing? Uh, um, he would be giving geometry, in that case, life. Like, how did it come about? How is it applied? What are the concepts behind it, as opposed to it being just something that is applied, right?
right.
And Joseph Pieper, are you familiar with Joseph Pieper?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
increasingly.
we love Joseph Pieper, right? Um,
And his
you
stuff is so short, but a lot of it, but like
Oh yeah, he's
packed.
saying it's saying. Speaking of that, I have um, uh, I'm about to read "Only the Lover Sings,"
I haven't read that one.
Well, maybe we'll read it together. That will be
Okay.
our great book
There
kind
you
of
go.
thing. It's a great. Have you read Leisure: The Basis of Culture?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well,
Yep.
it's
And his eschatology stuff too is pretty incredible. But
yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, that too certainly. So only the lover sings is kind of like a continuation maybe of Leisure: The Basis of Culture.
Oh, okay.
But in Leisure: The Basis of Culture, there he makes a wonderful distinction between the liberal arts and the servile arts.
Hmm.
And the liberal arts are those arts, those things, those great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going into the great books that liberate us, that make us free, that when we engage in contemplation of these kind of things, we are in fact experiencing true leisure and not just pastime.
Right.
If I may, here's another connection in that regard. All right, when we engage, let's say, in the great ideas, and we are contemplating them, and we are, um, uh, um, maybe reading great stories, and our imagination is being piqued. We're our wonder is being uh, uh, poked and prodded and so forth. Right?
Mm.
We might describe it as somehow being um, uh, under the influence of a muse,
Mm.
and of course the in the classical tradition there were these 9 muses that would
Right.
inspire folks for these different kind of things. Now, and muse, what is where we get the word, what, like museum,
Mm-hmm.
supposed to, and in some ways the great books are a little bit like a museum, right?
Right.
But here's something: amusement. All right, amusement. Amusement are just these kind of things that we do to pass time, but a is saying that it's not of the muse, that it's just
Mm.
these kind of things that we do. So for people like Pieper and what I think one is rightfully doing by engaging in the great books, especially in the context of conversation, in the
Mm-hmm.
context of what Mortimer Adler calls paideia, right? That kind of
Right.
communal learning and whatnot, or what Pieper in Leisure: The Basis of Culture, he shows that the word schola, right, from where we get our word school,
Yes.
we relate it to leisure,
I
right?
remember that now. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
that made me I had to like wander around for a while trying to make sense of that. I was like, wow, that is not, that is
yeah,
not the way we school's the for so many people. It's like I have to go there to get this credential so I can get a job.
right,
Which
right,
is
and
so disappointing because I mean, and that's the way I think even on my best day, I really deep down basically approached it that way, you know.
yeah, and even these great schools like where you teach and where I teach. I mean, think about even how they are structured. It's
Mhm.
almost, as I kind of say, industrial in some ways.
Yeah.
The teacher is there, and we're giving information out, um, directed toward the student, and it's not necessarily in the context of true like scole or true leisure or paideia, even this
Right.
community kind of thing where we're sitting around, where we're in a relaxed, contemplative, beautiful environment discussing
Mhm.
these things that really matter. And I'm not saying that all education should be that way, or that it has to be all that way, but I think that's a wonderful activity, and certainly for cultivating lifelong learning, maybe we need a little bit of that here
Mm.
and there, to um, I don't know, to bring in some kind of joy of engaging in deep ideas.
Well, and that's, I won't give too many details away because it's still sort of in development at the time of this recording. But basically, yeah, the school I'm teaching at, we're trying moving in this direction of starting a great books, program, and it's
Mhm.
it's starting on this voluntary, uh, sort of capacity where there's a certain amount like there's basically a list, and they go through and they pick out
Mhm.
certain ones, and there's different faculty mentors or advisors or whatever the word you want to use is. And it's supposed to be very discussion oriented, I think. And that's kind of getting
Right.
back to what you were saying earlier, the idea that, does this book resonate with us now, and basically invite us into maybe a greater sense of solidarity, not just now, but with everybody in the world now, but everyone in the world ever, everywhere. Um, and is it something that, again, has that staying power, something that is hopefully formative and gets us to, well, what I hope to really gain from it, or certainly what I plan on focusing on with the texts I've put myself down to potentially be an advisor on, all of which I specifically picked ones I had already read, which wasn't a requirement,
Mhm.
because they said, you can read it. And I was like, there's no way that I can take on, I mean, we have a baby coming in a couple months and all this kind of
Oh,
stuff. So I was
yes.
like, I think I'll pick a bunch, but I'll pick ones that I've read so I can just
Yeah.
revisit, reread. But, to focus on what I certainly hope to focus on is anything that it has to say or calls us to think about wisdom and virtue. Um,
Right.
and that's just, I don't think that's arbitrary of me, but quite frankly, and I'm not speaking ill of anyone by any means, and any of my coworkers or anything. I just, in general, and the way we all kind of tend to live today, it's just, those are not categories that are oftentimes on people's radar.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
let's have a talk about this, and then, like, and I'm not making light of it, but I don't, like, for us, I don't want it to just turn in, for example, to like, let's read this book and then let's, just kind of have a generic bland conversation about how it can make me a better neighbor. It's
Mhm.
it's like, yes, that's a good thing, but that's, for me personally, I run into that every time I try to make a reflection for like a YouTube video or or like an article. A lot of times it just tends to kind of come back to that kind of thing,
Yeah.
where
And
that's good, but I just, yeah, I feel this need as a teacher and and an ongoing student, always, like, how do I go deeper into those categories of thinking about wisdom and virtue? And I don't mean to throw that at you with no prep, but take it
no,
away.
no, no. I mean,
I want to get your thoughts on that.
that's a wonderful observation. Uh, Dr. Christopher Perrin, who runs a little classical publisher, actually here in central Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
um, he describes a classical education as cultivating the two things that you mentioned,
Hmm.
wisdom and virtue, but also eloquence as well.
Mm.
So that's
That's
another thing,
nice.
right? Right? Like, like being, an eloquent, well-spoken person, all right? And not in a,
Learn to talk good. No.
no, yeah, learn it, yeah. Well, and just maybe in an embodied way as well,
Yes.
comporting oneself well and so forth, which is also very much part of wisdom and virtue, and as Aristotle would say, part of rhetoric as well. If we want
Mm-hmm.
to um, say win hearts and minds or whatever it might be, uh, we can't, as many people today seem to believe, rely simply on a persuasive argument. Logic is a small part of that. It's right. The trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. All right. At the end, you bring all those together so that you can speak well, so that
Right.
you can um, uh, engage in the community in uh, if we ever get back to the community after this COVID-19 thing, but
That's
yeah,
certainly the goal.
so we can,
Uh,
yeah, so we can engage in our community as deeply and um, as well as possible, I guess.
mhm.
Um, So yeah, wisdom, virtue, and eloquence, I think, are all part of the program. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I answered your question. I got very
Yeah.
excited about those ideas.
No, that's a really good point too, because I'm thinking, the and I'm gonna botch it here, but I'm very sure, not that's not positive, but I'm very, very sure, confident that I read this in Tom Howard's book Chance of the Dance, which is
Mhm.
um I think it has the makings of a new great book, possibly, but that's a whole other conversation. But he says something, I think, in there to the effect of the real sort of mark of human education, or human flourishing, sacramental worldview, whatever you want to, however you want to focus on it, is the ability to say in other words. Um and I think there's something to that, and the idea that it's, I don't just have one, I'm not a one trick pony with just one mode of expression, one base
Mhm.
instinctive, like grunting my way. And it's like, did you ever see that picture of, like, the old thing of, like, the different profiles of the, supposed evolution, from like the monkey up to this upright dude.
Yes,
And then
yes.
it reverses and starts going the other direction as we get more and more into our devices.
I know. Oh,
It's
yes,
like,
yes, yes.
it's like, so, and I don't want to, I'm always careful not to bash technology per se, because that's how we're doing this. But the idea of nothing beats sitting down in your chair, with a cup of coffee and, heck, a pipe, whatever. I've got
Mhm.
one. I don't care who knows. And
Me
reading.
too.
There you go. And reading, you know, an actual paper, book. It's something tactile. I've got it. It feels a certain way. It smells a certain way. And when, I don't know, there's something about the experience of setting that time aside, where I'm fighting through distractions and I'm entering into a world that's got that wisdom and virtue at the heart of it. Because
Mhm.
this is where I guess what I'm rambling, but what I'm concerned about a little bit with some of this, the approach is, we're not just talking about like a book reading club per se.
Yeah.
And I again, some old colleagues, or colleagues I've encountered across or along the way, that might not like me saying this. I firmly believe that it's not sufficient to just like deify the act of reading itself, because I've heard this a million times. Like, it's
Yes.
just got to read anything, read anything.
I couldn't
Like,
agree more. Yes,
look,
absolutely.
I get what they're saying, but I just don't agree with it. I
Yeah.
don't think
It's
it's
not an end in itself. I think that's
right.
the thing. It's not an end in it.
and
It's,
and I just have, and I have friends, again, here we go, I'm not trying to make anybody mad, but it's like, look, I don't care if you've read 1,000 books and you've posted them all on Goodreads. I do that too. If everything is just like pulp, it's,
Waddle.
cotton candy,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know, I just, there's something important, I feel like, the older I get, and the more I do it, there's something important for your own development, I feel.
Yeah.
Like,
And
digging
that's
into a
actually,
hard, deep, book, a long book, an old book,
mhm.
just, yeah, I don't know.
And
Again, I'm
not just
rambling.
because it's old. No, no. That you actually reminded me of one of the things I was going to add when I was speaking before, and I bring this up to my students all the time, and it's something that seems to be just woefully forgotten. That is the difference between information and formation.
Huh.
And we've become so worried as educators,
Mm-hmm.
and this is largely because of a certain mode of secularism, maybe, or whatever it
Sure.
might be, the progressive education model where it's very utilitarian. I think all of these things really need to be reconsidered
Mm,
as we go on, but it's very information heavy, right? And
right.
we can look at that in all kinds of different ways. Information heavy, utilitarian. It's designed to not form the person, but used as maybe credentials or
Right.
pass a test so that then you can move on, get a job, this kind of thing, to make money. All of these things that we know within the classical tradition, at least, are only material ends, right?
Right.
They're not addressing the true end of who and what we really are, which is something that I think the great books have brought up again and again and again and again and again, in all kinds of different ways,
Mm,
to great effect, I think. So yes, that distinction between information and formation is very important, right? How are we being formed, right?
Right.
Um, and we shouldn't be worried about that. You know, one thing too that up until not too long ago, now you and I are, we were talking about, say, in the context of a Catholic school or a religious school, there is built into the curriculum kind of a sense of piety, right?
Hmm.
Pietas, a great Roman value for a long time that meant, you know, the due respect that is owed toward whomever, right? Maybe the as Chesterton calls the democracy of the dead, those who came
Right.
before, who,
I was going to say that earlier.
yeah, those who came
Yeah.
before, who um, who bequeathed to us these great traditions, these great ideas, um, these great virtues, and these great elements of wisdom and eloquence and so forth. But certainly also to the transcendent,
Hmm.
right? And lest we forget the transcendentals. You know,
Right.
I think uh, the great books, at least many of them, if not the overwhelming majority of them, have some relation to truth, beauty, or goodness, and they take those things very, very seriously,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and even Mortimer Adler would add another trinity onto there. Right? You have the truth, beauty, and goodness, but then what does he? He adds freedom. Oh gosh, I'm gonna forget this. Is like uh, freedom. I can't remember, but he has
Freedom's one of them.
six great ideas, right?
Okay.
The truth, beauty, and goodness, and really that's his thing. I think truth, beauty, and goodness are
Sure.
sufficient to stand on their own. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. We only have about a minute left, and you've mentioned a couple of specific great books already, but just maybe to, I'm not sure this is even a fair question for either one of us, but do you have a favorite, or is there one that comes to mind when you're asked that, whether it's your favorite or not? That's just
um,
a one that really has all those traits we were talking about.
gosh, yes. Well, there are several. Um, I would have to say the books that I keep going back to again and again and again, and this is, I'm partial because I'm more in the world of philosophy. Um, but I think there is a tremendous, well, here, I'll tell you what, I'll phrase it this way. A good way to get started in the great
Mm,
book. And here's one,
sure.
one,
I meant to
one
ask
part
that. Yeah.
too in the Western canon is that when you start reading, you pick up any of these great books, and it's almost you'll get a small uh, smattering of or a reference to the canon, as it were. I've
Hmm.
Dante, for example.
Right.
Yeah, you can start reading Dante, and once you start getting into Dante, you'll be like, okay, well, uh, he's talking about Virgil.
Mm,
So maybe you might want to go to Virgil, right? Or you might want to go another direction.
right.
Milton, going on up to Milton, who is writing something a little bit like the Divine Comedy, or
Right.
maybe even Thomas Aquinas. And I know there's some argument about the degree to which Dante appropriated Thomistic theology. Some
Right.
people say he did a lot. Some people say he changed it. Whatever. Nevertheless, you get my point.
Yeah.
Um, I'm in a little book club now. We're reading some Plato.
Mm,
Plato frequently mentions Homer, right?
right.
And people like that. Aristotle as well. I think if you want a good place to start maybe with the genre that you're most likely to thrive within,
Hmm.
right? Pick
Hmm.
one thing, um, and let it just take you where it wants to go, right? I mean,
Sure.
even if you're just in a maybe the smaller world of medieval literature, maybe you're reading Dante and um, you know Boccaccio or whomever.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot there, and you're ultimately going to spread out. Um,
Right.
but for me, I think a great place to start would be, say, you read Plato's Apology, Symposium, and Republic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic books, right?
Yeah.
Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics,
Yep.
foundational, absolutely foundational.
Yeah.
Going on up there, I think you mentioned the Confessions by Augustine. I mean, just monumental.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then go on up. There's all kinds of stuff. If you're a history buff, plenty of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Easy.
Thucydides, the others. Right. Yep.
Yeah. Even Augustine again, City of God.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And now that's a big one. I think people get intimidated by some of these because they're not easy often to slug through. But man, they're very much worth it. And
I can't believe how many of these things were dictated too, but that's a whole other.
Yes, yeah, right.
Like pacing around and dictating the City of God, that's incredible.
Right, yeah.
Well, hey, I'm gonna have to get going here, and we're going to dinner at my parents' house tonight, which should be fun, as long as they don't stop us from going out to socially see family. But anyway, some things are more important than physical health, even, as I've been telling people too. So and that's why we do this too. Our psychological and spiritual health, and great books can help us grow in that for sure. So Charles, thanks so much.
This is a great time to read the great books. When
if us are stuck at home, yeah, absolutely. Well, Charles, thanks so much for coming on the show today, and I'll definitely have you back.
Absolutely, my pleasure, my friend.
Yep, God bless.
All right, God bless you. Take care.
Well, that was definitely a delightful experience for me, so hopefully it was for you as well. Thanks so much for tuning into the Gracious Guest Show today. Please go ahead and go over wherever you get your podcast. Go ahead and subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Give me a review and a rating if you could. That really helps get the show boosted. Share this with a friend, and go back and check out previous shows. There's a lot of different content on here, and you can go ahead and share individual episodes if you just want to highlight one particular one that someone might like that and really, just hopefully spread the word any way you can. So also check out the website, thegraciousguest.org, for more, including my blogs and some other presentation information. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.